In this episode, I interview Guenther Dobrauz. I originally met Guenther through a colleague and a friend, Sarah Money, who told me that if I wanted to get registered for a FINMA license, the only person who knew how to do it was Guenther Dobrauz. And I think that originally I didn't take it very seriously. And then as I was working my way through with Mark Chapman, our CFO, how on earth to get registered at a time when I could not have continued to operate in Switzerland without being registered, we ended up on a cold winter's morning in Guenther Dobrauz's office at PwC, and he laid it out for us. And where, as before, it was all confusion and darkness, suddenly Mark Chapman and I had clarity about what we needed to do. So Guenther is really the reason why I've been able to stay in Zurich. And he's a lawyer, but a very unusual and special kind of lawyer in that he understands the law, but he also understands the big picture, and he understands how things fit together, and he sees how organizations operate within the law and within regulatory systems, and he understands how businesses need to succeed. And so many people will understand the rules, but not many people will understand how to implement those rules in a way that functions and works. Over and above that, Guenther's a polymath and a man who's interested in many things. He's been involved in the investment industry on the buy side in the past. He may well be full-time in the investment industry on the buy side in the future. And in his spare time, amongst many other things, he collects vinyl records. He's got a very large collection of vinyl records. And he also has an interest in motorcycles, something that I used to have a big interest in. And so I hope that you enjoy the conversation with Guenther. It's a great pleasure and I feel very privileged to have been able to work with him and also to be able to have him on this podcast. Today I have as a guest Guenther Dobrauz, who is an Austrian lawyer, but as best I can tell, he'll remain Austrian for the rest of his life, but he won't be a lawyer for the rest of his life. I think that there are very few lawyers that I've met who have such an extraordinary breadth and depth of interest beyond the law. And so it was really exciting for me to get to know Guenther, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where Guenther goes with his career. And as you know, this is an opportunity for me to ask Guenther questions I wouldn't normally be able to ask. But I just need to give you, the listener, a little bit more about how I met Guenther. So this was around 2015 in a dark, cold winter, and my family were in Mexico. And Switzerland had brought in a new law that required investment managers like me to be registered. And I'd never been registered in my life. And when I showed up in some very reputable lawyers' offices to ask what this implied or meant, I got people who really had no clue what they were talking about. And at least I was smart enough in the regulatory sense to understand that. And then a good friend of mine who ended up working with me, Sarah Money, said, you need to go talk to Guenther. And my CFO, Mark Chapman, and I talk about the time, what we were doing before we met Guenther and what we were doing after we met Guenther. And Guenther just met us in his office at Pricewaterhouse and just laid it out in about 20 minutes. We had everything we needed to know. And that was just the introductory meeting. And I was floored, actually. So I guess that's the introduction. And I'm going to just pause, Guenther, to allow you to say hello to the audience and maybe say something about yourself, because I really haven't said much about you, and you can introduce yourself in your own way. So over to you for a moment.
Well, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here and talk again. It's always a lot of fun. But first of all, thank you for the Austrian. I'm half Austrian, half Swiss. So let's say it's the best of each part, I do hope. So in terms of introducing myself, I think you mentioned correctly that I'm a partner with PwC Legal in Switzerland, and I'm leading it for all of Switzerland, and I'm also on the global legal leadership team. And on the other side, I'm also privately invested in interesting stuff, which I hope we also will be touching upon later, which kind of brings back the history before Pricewaterhouse. which was a super interesting time when I was co-running one of the first Swiss venture funds.
So, and we'll get to that interesting side in a second, but I want to stay with the boring regulatory stuff. Guenther, can you just explain to me and to those of us who are interested, and I hope some of you are, why was it that you were the only lawyer? I felt like you were the only lawyer in Switzerland who understood this. Why was that? Because you must have been aware of how clueless everybody was at the time.
Well, I don't think I was the only one. There was a couple out there, but in terms of the approach that we took, I think it was a bit different. And it probably had to do with the fact that I was an asset manager myself before, right? So I kind of understood what people were doing in reality, right? And what was laid down in the new law, which was transposing some of the EU requirements, there was not 100% a fit, should we say, right? So people needed to come up with solutions that allowed people to cross that bridge. And I think we came up with some very good ideas. And in the end, we were able to do something like, I don't know the exact number, but maybe 60% of the Swiss audiences, if that's true, but that's kind of a number I heard once. And I guess it's one of the old stories, right? Knowing what you do because you know kind of how the industry works. And on the other hand, knowing the regulatory thing. And the trick is to communicate that. That is how you create that bridge.
For those of us who are involved in having to deal with lawyers and or regulators and understanding of law, what I realize, and maybe you can comment on this, is that in any area of law, if what you're doing is important, you want to get to the person who it's like, it's not 50%. It might be 10% or 5%, or maybe it's a little more than 10% of the lawyers who claim to know about the subject area actually understand it with the depth that even the regulators or the judges would come to those lawyers to get an explanation and an understanding. And what's my point to the audience is, if you're doing something important and you're not in front of one of those people, you need to figure that out pretty quick and then get in front of one of the people who actually knows and realize that 90% of 100 people, there'll be 50% who claim to know, who actually think they know. And then there'll be 10% who actually do know and realize that there are 40% of the total who think they know, who don't know. And I guess that is my view. And really, just for everybody's benefit, and this is part of both my interest in Guenther and also my extreme gratitude, is that if we had not met Guenther, I'm not sure I'd still be living in Switzerland. But is it your experience that that's kind of the right distribution of expertise when it comes to legal matters? Or am I being mean to the ones who don't know?
No, I think it's a bit more complicated, right? When you look at the law as such, there's a huge variety of people working at it. And on the one hand, we have the classical attorneys, right? And I have only appreciation for what they're doing. They're practicing in court and they're doing the stuff there, and most of them pretty good. And then obviously there's the specialist lawyers and regulation, which was taking kind of its shape back then, is one of those specialized areas, right? It's very difficult to work with it at the end of the day. And back then, we were only starting ourselves. It was a small team. Today, we're around 50 lawyers working on that field. And I would say that 49 of them are better than me by now, right? Because they've learned the tricks. They know everything. And, we've become really a brand in itself in that space. I don't have the numbers out there. I guess you're right, but let's see.
And believe me, Guenther, we're going to get on this for everybody's interest. He's being very polite. This stuff is Guenther's bread and butter. But I do need to just stay here a little bit longer. One is that I'm extraordinarily impressed with Pricewaterhouse, and I have experienced with people that we've worked with that the very best ones often end up at Pricewaterhouse. I've seen that. And so I'll ask you two questions that kind of like related. One is, can you help me to understand? So I used to think of Pricewaterhouse as an audit firm, and now I discover that they do legal and regulatory work. But then there are also, I guess, in French you'd call them des cabinets. just law offices, smaller and bigger. And so why is Price Waterhouse in the legal profession? When did that happen? Why did it happen? And how should people like me think of, if we are looking for legal help or advice, why would we go to a cabinet or just a straight law office versus a Price Waterhouse, one of those audit brands? And then, additionally, why is it just in my mind, or why is it that Price Waterhouse seems to have such a pristine brand?
Well, first of all, thank you for that comment, which I'm sure that our global legal leader will be very happy to hear. First of all, there isn't like this one approach in PwC around the world, because it's different in every country. So in Switzerland, for example, we are part of PwC as a whole. In Austria or in Germany, there are standalone entities that do that. And based on that, the things that you're allowed to do is quite different. So here in Switzerland, we've probably been doing it for, 20 years or so. But we really got this big boost based on the regulation that was brought about during the last financial crisis, and really build it up based on that. So if you look into Switzerland specifically, I would say more than 50% of our people are indeed reg lawyers, and they're doing that. And in that, we have a huge breadth that you won't find in a classical law firm. Now, the real question is, what do you need? So if you're implementing something like MiFID or GDPR and so forth, it isn't just the legal part. It goes into the legal implementation, which we also cover. And interestingly, the last thing we've built, and I believe we're the only ones in the entire network for the time being, and it's also partly based on the Swiss employment law situation, is that we're also lending people that are not employed with PwC, but that we're bringing in from the market and so forth. So regulation is definitely one key part here in Switzerland. Then M&A is obviously also very important. And we have other areas that are a bit on the side, but we're not doing a lot of other things. So we're not going to court and so forth. If you then look into Germany, for example, it's a totally different story, because there it's a real law firm, and they also have the ability to do that. So it's very difficult to really answer your question, right? Because it's very diverse. But when it comes to regulation, I think this is where we really have a strong brand in most countries.
And last point on the legal front before we get on to other things, for the listeners' interest, and it was a sort of a surprise and learning for me, is that the regulatory agencies, so here I'm regulated by FINMA, they don't deal with me directly, or they very, very rarely will we have direct contact with FINMA, because they count on the audit firms to supervise us, and they count on the reports of the audit firms which come back to them. And so in a certain way, it's kind of delegated supervision, if you like. And it's a really interesting system. And for what it's worth, I railed at the things that I had to do 5 years ago. And now I feel like they really helped me in 1,000 different ways, which is a topic for a different conversation, because we're now going to go, before we go to the 3 books that you've published, Guenther, I just want to ask you about your family's origins in the town of Steyr in Austria. Tell us about that.
Well, it's part of the family, right? So there's, well, and actually in reality, the family comes from Trieste and then moved to Steyr, obviously under, well, it was in the 19th century, right? And yeah, and I was born there. So, right, that's the Austrian part of me. And I think it's a very special town. Nobody knows it because it's one of the very few towns in the world, I guess, that doesn't have a real rail connection, and hence also no connection to the Autobahn and so forth. And it's kind of a bit secluded, but it's, you know, if you have a day and if you're driving by, go there and check it out.
Will you ever move back there?
No. I was there as a kid and it was fun, but no.
So one of the things that you've invited me to I came and did a multi-sport in Kitzbühel, I think it is. And
yes, Spartan race.
And something that we didn't end up doing, although it was just too much going on, but we were going to do, I think it was the night ride or a cycle ride around the Walensee. But you are, you know, in a certain way, you're the most unusual lawyer because you're constantly thinking entrepreneurially, you're constantly thinking outside of the box, you're constantly finding new ways. And so, for example, Guenther invited me to this Spartan race in Kitzbühel, and I came out for it. And it was so much fun. And I'm certain that that's part of the connection that I have to Guenther. And I met dozens of Pricewaterhouse people. Is that normal to an audit firm? There are people coming up with those ideas all the time. And
I don't know. I mean, Joe DeSanner, who's the founder of Spartan, he's a good friend. And so when we saw this race going on in Kitzbühel, there's many, there was many before COVID, and I hope we will be coming back now. We just went there, right? And then it was a good combination of clients and friends and everything, right? And our then CEO really supported it, and it was good fun, So I hope it's going somewhere, and we will be doing it again. Is it typical for PwC? I don't know. I mean, again, PwC is 250,000 people. To say whatever is typical is very difficult.
And here's what I find fascinating about Guenther is that Guenther just collects this awesome stuff around him as he goes constantly. And this, now looking back to my first conversation with you, that was very, very clear to me. It's clear to me now, thinking back to what I was thinking. But Guenther just said that the founder of Spartan Race is a good friend. It's not surprising, because people I don't want to put myself in the same category as the founder of the Spartan Race, but we're attracted to Guenther because Guenther keeps coming up with stuff, and it's interesting and fun, and not all of it pans out. So our cycle ride didn't pan out, but the relationship remains strong. And so, it's going to be very exciting to watch how your career unfolds, because it's just going to be so. My point to you, Guenther, and my point to everyone listening is that for me, and I'm not trying to gush too much, but Guenther has qualities that I saw in the one time that I met Reed Hastings and in what I've read about him, in that it's not like Reed Hastings is some brilliant manager on account of being a brilliant manager. It's an account of an extraordinary capacity to think creatively and create through that creative thinking, and being a good person, being a mensch, you would say, in the Jewish world, collecting around you people that make exciting things happen. And so Spartan Race did happen. Our bike ride didn't. Guenther has got so many irons in the fire and so many things that are going on that is like so awesome. And we're going to just try and dive into some of them, really just for fun. And I guess the place that I have to start is in crypto, because after I met you, suddenly Guenther is traveling the world, appearing left, right, and center, talking at crypto conferences. And, I'm on the fence. So, but that doesn't really matter. How does a guy who's doing regulatory work for me and many others end up becoming an expert in crypto?
Well, first of all, I'm fascinated by blockchain technology, which underlies it, and crypto was the first application. And it's, again, I'm always fighting the idea of being just a lawyer, because I believe that, and you said it before, that I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm trying to look at the business side of things, and I'm looking at the legal requirements and try to bring them kind of together. And what happened here is, again, like most of the things that you're touching upon, I think are luck, right? And we got lucky because Switzerland is the crypto valley, and there's a lot of stuff happening. So when it all started to unfold and to move forward, some of my old venture contacts reached out to me, right, and told me about that, and this is how I got my first interest. Met more people, got involved, learned my stuff, and came up with ideas. And then it came down to the old same question, right? How do you get people negatively or positively approved via FINMA? Again, and many of the players that came to Switzerland came for regulatory reasons, because they wanted to be either positively or negatively approved, so they know that they're not going to prison for whatever they were about to do. And in the end, we got to do a lot of work in that space, and I'm quite proud of some of it. Yeah.
So just to dive in a little bit to sort of satisfy my curiosity, I understand obviously what are called AML, anti-money laundering procedures, which is kind of, for those of the listeners who don't work with the kind of plumbing of the world's financial system, it turns out that all money, even cash money, is not equal. The world's banking system, the banks of, and I'm going to explain it, and then as best I can to give you, Guenther, my level of understanding, then you'll go one step further or many steps further. When you want to bring money into the banking system cares about where that money came from. And if the banking system believes, under the regulation of various financial market supervisory bodies, that the money has come from illicit sources, the money cannot make it into the banking system, period. And so, the days in which you could bring large cash amounts or gold or anything else and deposit it into the banking system has gone away. And so, for example, we have to do AML procedures on every new investor in Aquamarine Fund, and banks have to do it every time they open an account. And so now we come to crypto. And so the big challenge for any developed regulated market is, what is the source of your funds? And so, somebody like me, these are all crypto wallets. I got MetaMask and Coinbase on my browser, but hell, I realized that through the blockchain you can trace this stuff, but how does crypto make it legitimately into the world's financial market system? How does FINMA, when it shows up to a conference of financial market regulators, demonstrate to other financial market regulators that that crypto is not a backdoor for illicit funds, at least not in Switzerland?
Right. Well, I think the one thing you need to understand is, if you have something like this here, interestingly, I just have British money on me now because I was in Britain, right? So there's this money. If I give it to you, then that's that, right? And then you can take it to the bank, and as long as you prove that you somehow got it, or if the amount is low enough, you can just put it into your bank. Now with crypto, it's a bit different. It's with money still in some very rare places like Iran and so forth, where a dollar note is basically dependent on the way it looks like, right? So if it's newer, then it's worth more. So the same is kind of true for crypto, because if you have a Bitcoin that was minted way back when they started it, and you want to bring it in, and it has by now gone through 1,000 hands, and including illicit ones, including places in God knows where, right? Then you need to prove that you had nothing to do with whatever happened there. So we have today quite a lot of engagements, also not us, but some of our colleagues, where you need to prove the origin of those funds if you want to get it into a Swiss bank. So I think that that thought is very true, and it's right to think about it, but it's probably not the main problem. So there's also been a publication or a research by the University of Cambridge published, where they're saying, especially when you go crypto to crypto, it's already 90% or more okay, right? So you don't have to worry about it. When you go from fiat into crypto, once you're crypto to crypto, it's a different story, because there are some coins like Monero and so forth who are really like, trying to protect whoever holds it, kind of going back to the very, very original idea. And those are very difficult to get into the system then, of course.
How confident are you that the Swiss market is not a backdoor?
Good Lord, how confident can any guy be, right? I think from what I've seen, I'm quite confident, but obviously I haven't seen everything.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I guess I want to move on to something that. So you are involved in I guess it's a venture capital firm that makes investments in the circular economy and blockchain. Maybe you can talk just a little bit about how that came about.
Sure, yeah, very happy to do so. You're talking about Exelixis Capital, right? Which is a family office set up, if you like, that was set up by two very good friends of mine and myself. The one being Sebastian from Doering, and the other Michael Dieckell. And I'm just an investor. Obviously, I don't have an executive function there, given the correct PwC compliance requirements, right, in this game. But the story to that is that I kind of always been into sustainability without knowing it, right? Just growing up in the countryside in Austria as a little kid. With my parents, that was effectively sustainability, right? Without us knowing it. And when I then later, after my university studies, which have been a while ago, But anyway, came to Switzerland, I started to realize that I couldn't live like that anymore, right? I couldn't find the bread, the butter, the whatever I wanted, right? That would be natural. So I was then starting to research it, publish it, and write quite a bit about it. And some 5 years ago, I kind of fell into circularity as a theme. And it was kind of like, wow, waking up, right? Was like, okay, that is the idea. And following that, I've been speaking at many of the conferences, met many of the startup companies, also some of the kind of spin-offs from established companies. But especially the startups are very interesting for me. And and then we started to invest in some of them together and ultimately decided to put it all under one company, that is Exelixis. So on the one hand, circular economy driven, and on the other hand, as you rightly say, blockchain. Blockchain is being kind of one of the exponential technologies that we're pursuing, not because we think it's the only one that is relevant to do so, but it's one where we are quite deep, since, you kindly mentioned before that I've been quite active over the past couple of years there. So I kind of know startups here and there, and we're trying to bring it all together and hopefully find the one or the other thing that, would be important to the world.
And so I know that I believe you've either attended, hosted, or given talks at Singularity University. And so you are very familiar with the world of Silicon Valley. So, I pay close attention to Charlie Munger, who's talked about the venture capital firms of Silicon Valley, some of the leading ones like Andreessen Horowitz and Sequoia. And he first of all, he talks about how extraordinarily meritocratic those firms are, how good they are at what they do. He's kind of said that, in a certain way, this is me talking, but Warren Buffett wrote an article called The Super Investors of Graham's and Doddsville, and he kind of showed how 16 or so investors who all had invested in different things and didn't really communicate all that closely with each other, all had extraordinary returns, all because they kind of prayed at the church of, at the time, Ben Graham. They were kind of value investors in a world where a lot of people were looking at momentum and other things. But really, if you think of the super investors of Silicon Valley, and Charlie Munger has talked about how insane amounts of stock market capitalization have been created out of Silicon Valley. They're extraordinary places. I mean, so many of these firms, including Facebook, Google, and many others, I don't have to name them. So now Exelis comes along and Guenther comes along, and it's based in Switzerland. And as I understand it, there's a kind of a very powerful feeding chain. There's a top of the food chain. Those guys sit at the top of the food chain. If you have the best idea, if you're the best entrepreneur, you want to be with them. And so they will see the best deals. And I know that you're aware of this. So you will have set yourself up in some way to carve out some kind of area of competence. And I'm curious to know how you thought about it and how you did it.
Well, I think the one thing I didn't mention before is obviously decentralization, which is kind of also playing into the game here. So I agree that historically, a lot of the mega companies of today, they came from certain places, and this is where all of those people were investing. I think today it's really a global thing, right? In the old days, you founded your company with the people that were around you or that you met and so forth. Today, we are seeing more and more companies that are being founded by people who have never even met, right, in the real world, especially in the past 2-3 years under COVID, of course, when everything became more complicated. And we were seeing, I don't want to call it a phenomenon because I don't have the numbers to prove that, but we're seeing more, especially of the young people, looking for what is my real talent, what do I want to achieve in this world, and who can I do it with? And if he or she is then in Brazil, in New Zealand, in India, doesn't matter. They connect and they do it. Now, when it comes to how do you invest, how do you find that, how do you interact with this? I think a lot of it still comes back to being kind of involved in some of the conferences, knowing some of the key investors out there who then would call you, send you, the deck or whatever they have received on that opportunity, and then develop it, right? And when you look into our portfolio, interestingly, a lot of the thing, there's usually a Swiss connection, but most of them are from all over the place. So the first one we disclosed is now in Singapore, right? So we're not in Singapore, we're not a Singapore venture fund, we're not a venture fund anyway. but I've known them for, I would say, 5 years, right? And then they've been doing amazing stuff in fashion, for example, right? So it's I think there's a new way starting now, and I think that also I have only appreciation for obviously all those great people you mentioned, but with the new generations coming to the table, I think new kind of ways of dealing with them will have to be applied.
And Guenther, I don't even do venture capital, and I get business plans coming into my email inbox, and I don't know that business. Obviously, any firm can only say yes to a very, very small number of people. And while there are some people that one doesn't mind being rude to because they're actually time wasters, there are a lot of people where it's not a fit, but you actually want them to think kindly of you because the world, life is long and you meet people again. And just managing that deal flow, managing relationships can be a full-time job, and deciding where to invest one's time. And I guess what I'm looking to you for is, and I think that everybody does it, if you're aware, the kind of the rules that you apply, the heuristics, when you decide to invest time in something, when you decide it's a quick no, how do you try to do the quick no with somebody that you actually want to feel good about yourself? Because it seems to me, and I haven't talked to many venture capitalists, that process of managing yourself around in great uncertainty, and at the end of the day, you'll have 100 people come to you where maybe one you can be sure is going to end up doing extraordinary things, but they're going to be 20 that you're never quite sure if they're going to do that. And so, how one manages oneself, what have you learned? What can you share?
Well, it is one of the biggest tricks out there, right? But I used to work in venture capital, so I know what it feels like if you're flooded with opportunity. That's not happening now, because if you go on the webpage of Exelixis, for example, there's no telephone number there, right? There's emails and people can send something, but there's already limiting it a little bit. And then they need to know us, which is, yes, easy today with social media and so forth. They can reach out to you, but at the bottom of it, I think it's mostly the real stuff. Now, yes, we've had to turn down, or they have had to turn down many opportunities that were amazing and that I would usually have invested if I had a venture fund, but we couldn't, right? Because it didn't feel to be aligned with the overall vision. So either they were not really circular, and that is quite tricky because most people aren't circular, right? And we can talk about that in a moment with all the greenwashing going on and so forth, right? You have to be very, very certain about that. And then exponential technologies, most notably blockchain or others, were not brought in, right? So there's enough of reasons you can say, look, great opportunity. We like it a lot, but it's just not in our ballpark, right? And so we've just very recently, seen amazing opportunities, even from Switzerland, funny enough, that we wanted to do, but we couldn't because it didn't fit everything. And the thing is, if you're more than one guy in a firm, then we just said, well, everybody has to agree so we can invest. So you can always say, well, I was for it, but somebody else was against it. No, but I think it's quite well understood how we function.
I think that when I think of these A16Z top of the food chain companies, I mean, a good friend of mine, classmate from business school, was a MD, MBA, and he went to work in medical technology venture capital. And actually what he would do is he would find doctors with good medical technology and would form a company with them and would take founder shares. But then, because he was a knowledgeable guy and had good selection skills, he had relationships with some of the seed capital funds. So he would be a founder with doctors. And then because he was involved in a deal, there would be other people who would look at his deals. And so if you're in the position of a founder, you would have wanted to get him on board. And my sense is that that's a huge part of it, is kind of like, who are the personalities involved? And I think that a question that I have for you, and I think that I would want to pursue this if I was, I mean, effectively, if here in Europe, there's index ventures, I've named some of the American firms, I want to invest in the companies that those VC firms are about to invest in.
Yeah,
of course. Or perhaps even get it the other way around, where they invest because I invested. That would be the most extraordinary thing. And I guess that's the path that you are on, or your partners are on at Exelis. Is that right?
Well, we hope. We hope. As said, it was started as a family office, and that's what it is right now. And we just want to show what we really believe in. Plus, you also have to be aware that a lot of people are talking, and rightly so, about sustainability right now. But on the other hand, circularity is also, it's old, is a new concept to most people, because we are all trained in the ways, of the past 100 and 150 years. And circularity was something that happened before and where we need to go back to. So there isn't that many really looking for those opportunities yet. I think it will change in the next couple of years. And by then, we will have a nice portfolio. But let's see. I mean, obviously, we want to make money down the road. That's clear. But first of all, we also want to show why we do that, right? And then if people like it and if they like what we're doing, well, let's see,
I'm looking forward to following that company. So I have 2 more places that I want to go. You've published 3 books, and I realize that these
actually 10. Yes.
10. Oh, I've got 3 in front of me. I apologize. One of them is called New Suits.
Yes.
And then there's the endlessly and infinitely interesting Liechtensteines Investmentrecht, which eine systemische Einführung, and there are others, but. My experience, and even if you're gathering together the work of other people where you have the introduction or maybe one of the chapters, it's an enormous amount of work, just enormous. I mean, I just want everybody who's listening to this who's not been involved in publishing a book, you have no clue. I mean, in a certain sense, writing my book, 240 pages, was 2 or 3 hours a day for 5 years. Just go figure. William Green, my friend William Green, wrote the book Richer, Wiser, Happier. 5 years full-time work. So how does a guy who has, and we're gonna end up on your some of your more unusual hobbies, but you're a partner at Price Waterhouse. You have a deep interest in the VC world right now. And then, you're also publishing books. How the hell does that happen?
Well, the answer I usually give is I don't have a TV set, right? I grew up without TV and I never got used to it. So I only got my TV with my wife, but I never switched it on in my life, right? We sometimes go to the cinema, or we sometimes watch a DVD, but I don't use it. So I usually have a couple of hours in the evening, and that's when I do it.
I mean, it's just extraordinarily impressive. And they're fun books to read, even if you're a non-lawyer. And especially now that you perhaps have had some exposure to Guenther, I want to get into heavy metal, vinyl records, and motorcycles. Did those hobbies choose you? Did you choose them, or did they choose you?
That is a good question. I don't know. I guess it's a combination of both, right? It's I chose them and they chose me as well.
So, you have like one of the world's largest collections of, he's being so modest. This is, forgive me for all you non-Europeans, but, Guenther's like, he's traveled the world, but, he's modest, like many Europeans are. So you have one of the largest vinyl connections, I think, in the world. Is that right?
I don't know. I think it's 10,000 plus, but I'm not sure whatever the world count is on that.
In German, there's a word, eine Leidenschaft, which is kind of like a passion which hurts, something like that. Is it eine Leidenschaft?
I'm not sure. I think it started way back when I was like 13 or 14, when I got a record player from my father, and it was really expensive. And so I was really feeling bad about it. And then the switch to CDs happened. And I never kind of participated in that, and I just kept collecting them. And then obviously all the record stores were shutting down, and I just got to buy stuff off them, right?
I mean, I think a very interesting statistic is that the actual, by number, I believe, sales of vinyl records has not declined by much, which is a really fascinating number. Now, so you don't get out of this, Guenther. So you do have a favorite band that I ought to remember, and they're pretty iconic. And you've probably attended pretty much every single one of their concerts. And it's a heavy metal band. Is it Iron Maiden?
I like Iron Maiden, but it's not my favorite band. No, I think they're in the top 20, but yeah, it's not like top 5.
So are you willing to share which one it is?
I actually don't know. I think the top 5 are never ranked. All right. So I definitely like Danzig and Typo Negative and Life of Agony and so forth. But it's, also when you're getting older, things are changing a little bit. You can't see this right now, but there is a poster of Nativity in Black, the tribute album, which is signed by all the bands, and they played on it. And I actually like all of them. Right. So.
And can I just ask you why?
I think it's interesting music, right? It's just what to when I was young in the formative years. I mean, to be honest, the record collection is not just heavy metal, right? It's everything from classic, huge jazz collection is in there. That was started by my grandfather, which I then took over and developed further. And yes, there is rock, and yes, there is heavy metal, but it's broader than that. Right?
Is there some kind of spiritual connection that those of us who don't listen to much heavy metal to something that, is there something deeper there than just rocking out?
I don't think so. It's just
and forgive me, I have to go there. So tell us about custom motorcycles, and is Deus Ex Machina the very best there is, or is there better? And for those of you who don't know, Deus Ex Machina are an outfit that started in Australia, and they take primarily Harley Davidson Sportsters and they do amazing things to them. And in that, Guenther, I'm with you. They are works of art. I would be willing to put one up on my wall. My wife might have a problem with that, but
well, I think they are the greatest. Mostly they're using Japanese motorcycles, by the way. So I have one done, which was originally a Kawasaki, or it still is a Kawasaki, right? But it's very difficult to figure that one out when you see them driving around.
So last question for you, Guenther. I think that, so what I'm learning in this interview I didn't quite realize quite how modest. So Guenther has many talents that he's being very modest about, which is interesting information in itself. But you have a son, and if you could sort of we're writing a letter to your son, these are the lessons that I want to impart to you for professional success. And I think that there are many kind of rules and heuristics that you apply without really thinking too hard about them, but they're an important part of the phenomenon that is Guenther Dobrauz. Is there any way that you can share those, imagining it's for your son, but actually it's for me in the audience? What have you learned that works?
Well, first of all, I think that most of my life was luck, right? So I'm very grateful for that. Because I know that I come from a privileged background and I got to grow up in Austria and Switzerland and so forth. But ultimately, even when you think about circularity, which is just really, really important to me, that is something I started also for him, because looking back, I don't want to be like, okay, I was just a guy with the expensive car, right? And there must be other things in this world. And I hope that those kind of ideas, that they go to him and that he starts to think about, what is this really all about, right? What are we really spending our money, our time, and so forth on? So I think ultimately it will come down to something that my father once said to me, and said, look, you're my son, and I just love you anyway. And whatever else you do, just be sure that it's really what your heart tells you to. And if he wants to be something that is totally out of whatever I may be thinking about, then I will still be happy as long as he's happy,
And Guenther, I'm going to have something to say about that in a second, but if somebody hears this and wants to get in touch with you, either because they want to hire Price Waterhouse or because they want to send your associates or people that you know a business plan, what would be the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, the best one is probably by social media. So I'm obviously on LinkedIn, but there's a lot of people there. I'm also using Instagram and so forth, which is a little harder to find because it's _GDS77 _. But no, realistically, I think the best way to reach me is via email. So my PwC email is guenther.dobrauz@pwc.ch, or the Exelixis one is gd@exelixis.ch.
Thank you, Guenther. I'm going to close out this interview with a kind of just a reflection, which I had not expected when I started this, but so just note that when I asked Guenther what's contributed to his success to date and will certainly contribute to his future success, Guenther kind of said luck. And I think that Guenther was being genuine. He really does believe that. And I just want to make a comparison with somebody else that I had the privilege to interview, not for this podcast, but in a public setting, was F.W. de Klerk. And I sat down with F.W. de Klerk and I'd read through his book, and I kind of turned to him and I said, what was it that enabled you to exercise the extraordinary leadership that allowed in F.W. de Klerk's case to change the direction of South African history? And cut a long story short, F.W. de Klerk didn't really answer the question for me. And what I realized was that it was kind of embodied in him. It was just part of who he was. And so now for the listener, I want to tell you guys that I profoundly disagree with Guenther's assessment that it's luck. That may be his genuine assessment, but what I've seen is a combination of, so it's creativity, creative thinking, willingness to think in directions that other people are not willing to think in, and then to take action on it. To take action on it, even though sometimes or often the action doesn't lead to anything interesting, but to continue to do that. An extraordinary amount of hard work. Did you notice how Guenther says, oh, I was lucky enough to go to great universities? What he didn't say is that to get into those universities, he had to work hard and he had to pass the exams and he had to be selected. And so I think that in some cases, people lay out the rules for us for success. And in some cases, we see success and we have to study it to try and understand it. And in a subsequent conversation, maybe not in a podcast, what I'm going to drill down on is, because I think that a part that we haven't covered and a part that I don't fully understand is that you do have an extraordinary capacity to create relationships. And this is just one, but you have many, many relationships like that. And again, I think that it comes naturally to you, Guenther, but you don't realize how rare that skill is. So maybe in a future date, I'll learn that from you. Guenther, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.